cover some of the material. But this is fun for me to talk about. This is one of my favorite topics because I get to deal on this topic a lot at work. And there's a couple reasons why I think this is so important. One is we get to do, especially for those of us working in nonprofits or those of us working with people, we get to do really cool things. And it's a privilege to get to do the things that we do. And for most of us, we're really driven by a passion for the work. And it's easy to lose that passion if we don't take care of ourselves, and to lose that sense of privilege around what we're doing. So that's one of the biggest reasons. Also, for those of us who are overseeing other staff, making this a priority is important for a couple of reasons. One is if we care about the people that we're serving, even more so or just as much, we should care about the staff that we're overseeing. And also because it's just good business sense. We want to have retention in our programs. We want to keep people around. Makes our programs better and supports good outcomes. So taking care of ourselves, taking care of our staff, there are a lot of good reasons to care about that. So let's just chat a little bit about what is wellness. This is sort of an official definition at first. An active process of becoming aware of and making choices toward living a healthy and fulfilling life. My favorite part of that is it's an active process. There are things that we need to do to take care of ourselves so that we can be successful in what we're doing. And this is true whether we work in human services, whether we work with people, or whether we work in a bank or an animal shelter, whatever it is that we do in our lives. In order to feel fulfilled in what we're doing and happy in what we're doing, we really need to pay attention to our own wellness. At the end of this slide, and I'll ask Adrienne if she can email these slides out to you, there's a couple TED Talks or other resources at the end that you can listen to. And one of those is Gus Winger, I think is his name. And he talks about how we pay a lot of attention to our physical health, but we really don't pay attention to our emotional or psychological wellness as much. We just aren't trained to do that in the same way. Little kids will pay attention to brushing their teeth or making sure they get a Band-Aid when they're injured. But really very little attention do we give to emotional insult that we experience all the time: sadness, loneliness, disappointment, feeling unsuccessful. Those
may I add to that?
Yeah.
Just to highlight your point, I do a lot of different trainings. One of them is managing conflict, the other is employment. And one of the slides that I start out with is data that shows number one reason for primary care physician visits, stress and depression, which equates to like 400 million per year. And then another statistic, 7 out of 10 are actively somewhat disengaged in their work, and it's a result of wellness issues.
Isn't that amazing? That I heard Marta says there's an echo when you speak, Adrienne.
Okay, sorry. I'll speak quiet.
There's also statistics around loneliness. How loneliness leads to depression, leads to pretty severe physical health issues, and even death. So just the management of our psychological first aid, how important that is. This is my sort of definition here: an on-purpose or intentional decision to do what sometimes are typically not easy, to improve our overall well-being or stability across those 5 domains, which we pretty typically say are the primary domains of our lives: the physical, social, emotional, mental, spiritual. On purpose, meaning we make a decision to do something. For the most part, I think, I just sort of wing it through my day and react primarily to the things that are coming at me. To be on purpose or intentional means that I'm going to plan to do something directly affecting my well-being or my positive attitude, or how I can feel a little bit better physically, socially, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, so that I can be more effective in what I'm doing. It's really time well spent. I also said here, it's typically not easy. It's usually not the easy thing. For me, going to the gym at 9 o'clock last night really didn't feel great. Sitting on the couch and watching another episode of some Netflix show that I probably don't need to be watching felt a lot easier to me. Usually this is asking ourselves to do something that we don't really feel like doing. What's the big deal anyway? We talk a lot here at our work areas about vicarious trauma. And vicarious trauma isn't necessarily something that just happens at work. It can happen with your friends and family. It happens anytime that we are closely associating with other people who are also going through something that might be primarily traumatic for them, or things that are just difficult. When we talk about trauma, we always imagine the worst: earthquakes, mass shootings, the things that we are exposed to, certainly lately through the news. Trauma doesn't have to be such a tremendous thing. Trauma is loss. Trauma is disappointment. Trauma is the hard things, the obstacles that we're overcoming in our lives, really on a very regular basis. Every single one of us is familiar with trauma in one way or another throughout our lifetime, and we can think back on those things, and you can see how it's changed, affected you. It's made you the person that you are today. So many people will talk about the positive effects of trauma in their life, which is very refreshing. I think we tend to look at post-traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic trauma, fill in the blank, times when we've been very negatively affected by our trauma, which is really true, and we need to respect and honor that. The other side of trauma is that it can be a huge growth trigger for us. We often will say it's very rare that we've ever grown on a good day, that we've ever really changed in easy or not challenging times. Typically, we grow from discomfort. And what we want to target for our growth is just enough discomfort to grow, but not so much discomfort to overwhelm. Trauma is when we have so much discomfort that it overwhelms. It means that the trauma event, or what we're struggling with, is actually a little bit bigger than what our coping capacity is. And then you see symptoms as a result of that. So something, maybe I always think about loss as something that, none of us really are good at. Losing somebody close to us, losing a job, losing financial status. Really hard to let go of loss. It's not something that we're well programmed to handle, and it takes time for us to adjust. And typically when trauma happens, it means that we didn't have the coping strategies to get through that in a way that we sort of experienced it as a rocking of the boat. It feels a lot more like the boat tipped over, we took on some water, we bailed, boat righted itself, and we continued to sail. And that's sort of how, for most of us, life sort of goes. When we're sort of hanging out in the boat of a friend who's got, some trauma that tipped over that boat, the boat took on some water, and we watched, and we experienced that emotion. Some of that is that in the process of being close to people, we get affected by that because we care about them. Also, because we're human beings. When we witness somebody else experience loss or grief, anger, frustration, we know those feelings, and it brings back for ourselves our own experiences of those events. So we sometimes re-experience our own stuff, and sometimes we're just traumatized by somebody else's experience. So I like to call that the stuff that globs onto you when you support somebody else. It's like their stuff sort of hangs onto you a little bit, and we have to be pretty intentional about noticing that, have insight about it, and then get some strategies about how we take care of ourselves in that process. I think one of the most rewarding things that we have the opportunity to do is support another person through a hard time, is to be present with other people, caring for other people. It's usually very reinforcing for us. But this is the price that we pay for that, is certainly carrying some of that emotion. And then here we get vicarious trauma at work, in our relationships with friends and family, even from watching video and television. I know we've been witnessing, we continue to witness. Oh yeah, Marta, do you have a question? Thanks, Adrian. If you do, just holler out or type. Marta's typing. In witnessing some of the tragedies that have been happening just on television. Okay, good. I'm glad you're okay. I know that's difficult to watch. If you watched the Las Vegas mass shootings and you heard the sound of gunfire, many people described that as very difficult. That was very difficult for me to hear. It's not something that we're used to, accustomed to hearing. And so for a lot of people, they chose not to watch that coverage because it really negatively affected them. So that's something that's really important to be aware of, and we'll talk more about that. How do we protect ourselves? Let's talk about that now. Limiting exposure is one thing. In mobile crisis, with our staff, we talk a lot about limiting exposure. So really important that when we're supporting people, that we're able to be very present with people in a really genuine way. So it's inevitable that there's going to be some of that glob on that we talked about in the last slide. Sometimes when mobile crisis is going out, it's in post-vention, so somebody has died by suicide. One thing that we talk really seriously about is not exposing yourself to a death scene or to a body, limiting our sensory input related to things that are really traumatic. So what does that mean for most of us? Most of us, we're not exposed to dead bodies and really hard things that happen. But what we can do is limit our exposure to the sensory material that's traumatic. So maybe that means we don't need to look at something that's really harmful images. Maybe we don't need to hear the harmful images, like I described for people who were upset by the mass shooting, the sound of the mass shooting. That's something that you can limit your exposure to. Looking at pictures, a lot of people, for example, like family victims of a homicide, they choose not to look at the pictures or the images because they don't want to remember their loved one in that way. So limiting exposure, being able to say, this is what I'm able to do and this is what I'm not able to do. Knowing what your boundaries are, knowing what your triggers are. For a lot of staff, they can say, this is a topic area where I really struggle. Kids are really hard for a lot of people. Abuse situations or being exposed to kids with abuse situations because of a person's personal history or maybe their own belief system that they're struggling to overcome. So that's something that people can make a decision to protect themselves from. And I think for a lot of people, they'll talk about. Adrian, you said that's why it's really bad that the media keeps replaying these tragedies. It's sad we're the United States of depression. It's so true. We have become a society where we overexpose ourselves to things that can, arguably be pretty traumatic, and we are all giving ourselves vicarious trauma. I think about 9/11 back in 2001, when so many people entered into treatment after that event with a great deal of post-traumatic stress symptoms. And that was from the exposure to media, literally watching, replaying over and over and over an event that was extremely traumatic. We have so much access to people's suffering. We don't have to even know them anymore to create vicarious or secondary trauma for ourselves because we have that level of exposure. Establishing helpful support resources at work and outside of work. This is, I think, one of the most valuable things that we can do for ourselves. That doesn't mean that we have to have best friends at work or that we have unprofessional relationships. I think it's really important that we're able to, alongside people who understand maybe the exposure that you're having at work to things that are difficult, they understand that best. So being able to process that together. When we're doing a trauma debrief, so you go in and you talk to people who've experienced some kind of a trauma, what we want to really do is unpack the sensory material of that trauma event. What did you see? What did you hear? Even smells. If you think back to times in your own life where you smelled something and you're like, that reminds me of something and it gives me a really strong negative feeling and I'm not sure why. What you want to do when a trauma happens is almost create file folders in your brain for where things fit. What our brain does in a trauma is it skips some of the processing portions of our brain so that when we go to tell the story, sometimes it doesn't make sense or it's out of order. We remember bits and pieces, but they don't fit with the whole narrative. So what we'll tell somebody who's just been traumatized is to tell that narrative from the beginning to the end, highlighting all of that sensory material. This is what I saw. This is what I was hearing. This is what I was smelling. This is what it felt like. So all those senses get involved so that you can file them appropriately away in the file folders in your brain. so that 5 years from now, when you smell a smell that reminds you of that car accident, you know why it brings a negative feeling. And that's successful trauma processing, to say every time I smell burning rubber, it reminds me of this car accident that I had, and it makes me feel a little bit anxious. So to be able to say that is really successful processing. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. We never put that together. Like, where does that come from? Why do I have those weird feelings attached to some sensory piece of information? And I think the hard part is those things can feed into trauma responses years after the trauma event if they can't get unpacked well and sort of filed away in those file cabinets of your brain. It doesn't mean that those bad memories will ever go away necessarily, although the sting certainly subsides, but it means that we understand them. And that's one of the best ways for coping with things, is if we have a sense of understanding and a sense of control over our own experience. So establishing those helpful resources gives you the opportunity to tell the narrative of what you experienced. So for example, sort of an extreme example of work, certainly when we talk about mobile crisis, but those crisis workers go out in pairs, and when they leave a crisis scene or a crisis event and they're driving back to the office or driving to their next crisis event, they can talk about that together and say, this is what this experience was like for me. This is maybe how I was personally impacted, or these were the harder components. And it's really important because that literally just takes the glob off of you and puts it back where it belongs, so that they don't have to carry that, through the remainder of their day. Talk it out in a timely way. We really encourage the crisis workers or any staff to really, as quickly as possible, have the opportunity to tell that narrative story, to be able to talk that out. This is how I was affected. This is why I think I was affected that way. And then be able to say something positive about the experience, something positive about the person, so that you can create some positive memory of it and then let it go. And preferably for those crisis workers, before they get into their next crisis event or their next mobile intervention, so that they're not carrying it through their day, because that starts to accumulate and then it gets harder to figure out. So you know how sometimes you get to about lunchtime, you're having a crazy morning, running around at work, you get to about lunchtime and you're like, I just feel like crap in the back of my brain and I don't know where that's coming from. I just feel like something's really bothering me and I don't remember what. So you sort of forensically go back through your morning and you remember in passing, at the course of moving at 70 miles an hour all morning long, some comment that somebody made to you that just felt little, it kind of just stung just a little bit, and you filed that back in your brain, but you forgot to pay attention to it, but the feeling remains. And you just kind of feel the sting, but you don't remember what it came from. How important it is that we're able to process these things through, or talk them out if that's appropriate, in a really timely way, so that we can let it go. So if a conversation needs to be had with that coworker or that family member, that we can either maybe shoot out a text and bookmark it for later, or that we can have that conversation that needs to be had, so that we can let this go and not carry this around. Because when this starts globbing onto us and piling up, it gets to feel very heavy by the end of the day. Attitude is everything. So challenging negative beliefs. I think when we work with people, or when we're working with harder populations, or we're just doing hard work, it becomes really easy for us to start thinking negatively about people, as influenced by maybe one or two interactions that felt bad. It's easy for us to project things onto groups of people that aren't fair or true, and they influence our capacity to believe in the capacity of people to do great things. One of the things that I think must happen for us if we're going to work with people is we have to believe that people have capacity to do big things, and that our role is just to empower them and give them the tools, and then watch them fly, and that people will fly when the weights are lifted off their wings. And that's really our job. But if we allow negative beliefs and negativity to impact us, we will stop empowering people, because we're not going to believe that they can fly. And that's really our job, is to really give people those opportunities. So look at continuing to come back to ourselves and saying, why am I feeling these negative feelings, or thinking these negative thoughts? Where are they coming from? And what do I need to do to unpack them? Stay fresh. What drives your work passion? I think very few people end up in the world of people serving or nonprofits influencing change in our systems and our communities if you didn't have some kind of a passion that landed you there. Now, in real life, I know my college major changed 3 times. And sometimes I've thought to myself, one more change will have been great. Emergency medicine is probably where I should have landed, but this is fine too. But absolutely, I can think of things that I am passionate about what I'm doing at work. And I also am very aware on the days when I'm not feeling the passion and I'm driving down the turnpike and I have to really on purpose challenge myself to, if that, do something that's going to help me get in touch with that passion before I arrive at work. Those of you who are supervising people, or you're working really closely with people, you know the impact that we have when we walk in a room and we're just not feeling it today. It's in our face, it's in our demeanor, and we're just kind of like dragging, and that's contagious. People feel that. Similarly, you know what happens when you walk in a room and you feel your positivity or you're feeling optimistic and you have that passion, you're in touch with that passion, and it's genuine. We don't have to be, really faking it. It affects the people around us. People feel that. I know I have felt that from other people. I always say we are the atmosphere for our workplace as leaders. Absolutely. Like we don't, as leaders, we don't get to come into work and just sort of drag in the door, because our responsibility is to other people. And I always say to, other leaders that we shouldn't fake that. That doesn't need to be disingenuous. And that comes back to wellness. If we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not going to have it to bring it. And it's our job to bring it. It's our job description to bring it. And if we can't bring the optimism and the positivity and the passion for what we're doing, we're robbing the people that deserve that from us, especially when we're leading them. So staying in touch with passion. For me, when I'm driving to work and I'm not feeling the passion, I need to force myself to do something intentionally that usually I don't want to do. And that would be call somebody that I can be honest with about what I'm struggling with. That can be put on that TED Talk that I need to listen to, or something positive, or some positive music. What am I listening to? What am I filling myself with that's going to really prepare me to be able to fill other people? So I agree, though. I want to tell you that's work. These are wellness suggestions collected from real staff. I did this yesterday. I sent out an email to like 100 staff. These are some of them of what they came back with. I'll tell you what, if you want to do that at work, that is really fun to do. I've got probably twice this number that I'm going to send out to everybody. It's just encouraging to see what everybody's doing that helps them get through hard days or hard moments, or just managing ourselves. Every day is honestly hard and difficult. There's hard things. We just need to take care of ourselves. So this is fun. If you want to do this at work, shoot out an email to everybody and say, hey, can we share what we do to stay well, the things we do to take care of ourselves, whether that's on a good day or just a bad day. What do you do to be okay? So I've got a bunch of these. I'm sending them out. Thanks, Adrian. I'm sending them out to about 100 staff that are going to get to see these things. And at our workplace lately, in the last month, this is a really timely webinar for me. We've been focusing quite a bit on our own wellness, on what do you like about work? What helps you in your work environment? What are you excited about when you walk into work? I want people to be sharing these things so that we can make sure that we're creating that space intentionally on purpose, that we're creating our work cultures, our program cultures that are going to take care of people and that honor what they're asking for. So again, we'll send out these slides so that you guys have some of these ideas, but I'm going to challenge you to collect them for yourselves and collect them from other people in your office. These are just some more resources, some things that I put Guy Winch on here. That's who I referenced earlier. He's got a fun talk about emotional first aid. It's pretty challenging. That Laura Vanderkam talks about managing your free time. That made me feel about like crap in terms of how I manage my free time. But she makes a great point. You're going to prioritize what's important to you. If playing that stupid dots game on your phone is what's most important to you, you're going to do it. And so I need to maybe take a look at myself there. But creating self-care plans, being intent. We tell staff all the time at work, when you walk out the door today and you're driving home, what are the 3 things that you're going to do on purpose to let go of what happened for 8 hours here? What are those things that are going to work for you? What works for me is going to work for you. I'll blast music some days. I'll call somebody other days. I'll listen to that TED Talk. Maybe it's the intentional music choices. But maybe it's sitting in silence. For one guy I know, excuse me, he comes in every morning blasting classical music. It makes no sense to me. I've never blasted classical music. Beethoven has not been usually my music choice, but that works for him. And just incredibly important that we know what works for us. So you will get those. You will get those slides. And then the last thing I want to share with you is just that mobile crisis is always an option for you, or for your coworkers, or to have that number. I apologize, I don't have that number here for you, but I'll say it out loud if you want to write it down, or you know what, I'm going to write it in the message right here. I think the most important thing that we need to remember is it's normal to have crisis. It's normal to struggle with depression and anxiety. That, you know, we all carry a backpack, an invisible backpack. And in that backpack can be kind of the weights of the parts of our lives that we simply we don't have the option to unload. There are things about our lives that we can make decisions about, that we can improve. But there are other pieces that, you know, if you live with a mental illness, if you live with a chronic other physical health illness, if you have a child with special needs, if you care for an elder person in your life, those are things that are just, they take a little bit of energy out of you, and they can make it harder sometimes. So we got to take care of ourselves and try to keep those backpacks as light as possible. But even more importantly, we want to create stronger muscles so that we're able to carry our backpacks around, so that we can carry those weights that sometimes we have a choice about and sometimes we don't, and supporting one another. So that mobile crisis number is always a resource. Sometimes people call just to consult. What's a resource that I could offer to this person? From that end of the spectrum all the way to, you know, acute risk, and how we can support people through acute risk. So never hesitate to call. There's always a crisis worker that's going to answer that line. And that is the end of what I have, Adrienne. Special thanks to Marta, Ashley, and Becca for listening.
Well, we have Ashley who is joined in.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks everybody so much.
So much.
Absolutely.
So someone is typing, but I wanted to say, will you share what you're doing today to give an example of the work that you're doing?
Sure.
And we want to thank you all for participating. And I want to stop talking because I have the echo.
Sure. Today, we're actually going over to Springford High School, and we're going to be training about 100 people today, administrators and school psychologists and counselors and nurses in QPR, which is a suicide prevention education training, for about 2 hours. So very excited about getting QPR and just the conversation about suicide into our schools. We know that at least 80% of kids in Montgomery County report that at some point they have experienced thoughts of suicide. And I would venture to guess that about 100% of human beings at some point in their life have had, even if it's just a fleeting thought about suicide. So